Hey folks, welcome back to the Mac and Mike Show. He's Mike, I'm Mac. Never the twain shall meet. And you're about to have some wisdom dropped on you, Imparted, we're going to impart some wisdom and you can take what you want and help yourself. What we're going to talk about today is a lot of things kind of directly or tangentially related to the big beautiful bill. That's been in the news recently, and both Mike and I are fans of our president. That is maybe not how he acts or behaves sometimes, but what he does. And I think it's fair to say we're both fans of Elon Musk.
Yep.
I think it's fair that we respect that both of us respect both gentlemen, and not only for what they've accomplished, but also for their attitudes and the way they work with the world, etc. And so the topic specifically today is going to be the big beautiful bill. Can we afford $2.5 trillion more debt, national debt for our nation? Because the big beautiful bill, while it does a lot of very good things, it makes permanent the tax cuts that President Trump got into place 6 years ago. If those tax cuts go away, they're supposed to sunset. If they do go away, in effect, that's a 20 or 22% increase in taxes for every American. And with our economy the way it is, a 22% tax increase, that is the absence of the tax cuts going away, would be regarded as an increase, would not be helpful to the economy. But more than that, there's several things in the bill that can't be described any other way other than pork. And we've had pork barrel politics in the United States of America since we've had politics, right? Everyone has their own little sacred cow, their own little special pet project that they want to get funded by the federal government. I think part of the problem that we have with this big, beautiful bill is that it increases our national debt by $2.5 trillion. Is that a reasonable thing to do, Mike?
Well, like you said earlier, we had this discussion, and the hope is on Trump's level that we're able to increase the economic power and the GDP of the United States to the point where that's more or less wiped out. So it's still too, what's the old guy in New York used to say? The rent's too damn high. Well, the deficit and the debt's too damn high. There's no doubt. So, I mean, I don't know which side is true. It's sort of related to the tariffs. There are good people on both sides of that issue. And I think there are good people on both sides of this issue, at least on the Republican side. Remember that Democrats are not going to vote for anything Trump does just because it's Trump, doesn't matter what it means for the country. But even within the Republican Party, there's people like Rand Paul and I guess Tillis, and they feel like we shouldn't add this debt. I'm a person that doesn't like to add debt. At the same time, Jamie Dimon, as you pointed out the other day, had said instead of investing in Bitcoin and these other things, which I think are attached to this bill, right?
Yes.
We should be investing in bombs, bullets, and beans, essentially in drones and that, because in just a few days, our missile stockpile would be used up if something breaks out around Taiwan.
That was an amazing thing to me. When Jamie Dimon, if you're unaware, is the president of J.P. Morgan Chase, which is one of the largest banks in America. And he was in California and he was at this conference where they were talking about banking issues. And, unsolicited, I shouldn't say unsolicited, there was a question from the interviewer that said something about where should we be investing. And, what Diamond said is it shouldn't be Bitcoin. It should be bullets and bombs and drones and tanks and those kinds of things. And for someone in the banking industry to make those kinds of statements, and you could probably put a link in the description to our conversation, but for somebody in the banking industry to talk about not Bitcoin or not investments themselves, but, and what he said was that if there is a war in the South China Sea, obviously, as you noted, that's Taiwan, that we have enough missiles for a 7-day war. Now, no war with China is going to be over in 7 days. So what does that mean to our ability to defend a country that we have a pact of mutual support with. And what does that mean as far as so many other things in the world? People fail to realize that the island of Taiwan, for as small as it is, produces something like 90% of the most intelligent computer chips, the most powerful computer chips in the world. And I know that the mainland China looks at that and says, "Well, that's great. If we can control those chip plants, we have an advantage over every other country in the world," which is why we're putting chip plants in America and in Mexico to try to overcome that. And you're right. As much as I respect both Donald Trump and Elon Musk, they're coming at this problem from different perspectives. When I was in consulting, we used to tell people there's really only two ways we can help your business. One is we can improve the top line, or the second way, we could decrease the bottom line. It's two things that look at the problem from opposite ends of the spectrum. If we want to increase the top line, what we're talking about is we're going to increase the business that you do. We're going to increase the amount of dollars flowing into your business. If we want to decrease the bottom line, what we're doing is we're trying to cut expense. We're trying to take out anything that's not needed, so those dollars, that money that does come into the business, stays in the business as profit as opposed to going to the expense side of the ledger. So those were really there are a lot of other fancy names and different tips and tricks that we could use, but really it all fell down into increasing the top line or reducing the bottom line. And I think therein lies the difference between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. What Donald Trump believes is that if he can get the economy humming hot enough, going fast enough, that the combination of the increased taxes that would come from more business, along with, by the way, the money we'd be collecting from tariffs from other nations importing or exporting their goods, becoming our imports, that we could collect enough revenue to overcome that $2.5 trillion worth of deficit spending that would go right to the debt. And what Elon Musk is saying, he's saying something very different. He's saying right now, 20%, 25%, I think, of our revenue goes just for debt service. It's 25% of our revenue the government is collecting. It's not going for defense. It's not going for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all these other guaranteed programs that we have. 25% is going to pay debt service on money that we owe. And his position is that is unsustainable. Now, everyone knows, I think, that Elon Musk didn't quit his job. He left his job as heading up these very prolific companies, doing a lot of good business, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and his robotics company, and his X platform, what used to be Twitter. So, he left that job to go to the government to try to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. And he and a bunch of, very talented coders and programmers, that kind of stuff, they've uncovered a tremendous amount of waste, fraud, and abuse. But it wasn't $2.5 trillion worth. And I think he's looking at this and saying, hey, wait a minute. I've given up my world to help the country. And while I'm trying to fight all these existing waste, fraud, and abuse issues, you're handing $2.5 trillion, much of which is waste, fraud, and abuse, a deficit spending. How can we recover from that? Now, I don't know who's right. I know that in the 1920s, before we had all of these taxes, the government paid for itself by use of tariffs. We didn't have an income tax. So the money government spent was money that they received from fees and those kinds of things, but also from tariffs from exports that are coming into our country as imports. So who's right? Elon Musk, who says we can't continue to move forward with a federal budget that's 25% debt service only? Or is it Donald Trump that says if we don't have these tax cuts and we don't have an elimination of tax on Social Security, an elimination of tax overtime, an elimination of tax on tips, and all these other things that he's talking about, what happens to our economy? Can we thrive? Can we survive without this kind of investment in our nation. And I don't know the answer to that, Mike. I'm not smart enough to know which one of those very smart men are right, but I do trust both of them. So I'm anxious to. But it's worse than that because when Elon Musk said he said in different ways he can't support the president in this deficit spending, and then the president responded by saying, "Okay, we're gonna remove all the government contracts from Tesla and SpaceX," and then of course Elon Musk responded to that by saying, "Okay, we're shutting down the Dragon space program because we won't have a customer for it." All of those things seem like counterproductive to me.
Yeah, tit for tat. You kill my dog, I'll kill your cat. But back to the tariffs thing. I think I explained this in a previous video. I did the math. Now, this is using current data and statistics based on a 10% across the board tariff, which is where I think the best case scenario is where we end up with every country. So we export, there's a difference between our export and our import every year of about $1 trillion. So out of that $1 trillion, if you take 10% of 1 trillion, which is the difference, it's a net increase of $500 billion a year for us, but that comes off the trade deficit. There's no way that with a $7 trillion annual budget, that $500 billion is going to cover a whole lot of it. So it will have to do and be contingent on building a robust American economy. We have the investments coming in at, I guess the last figure I heard was 10 trillion. Now people are going to argue, well, those are promises, they're not firm. But look, if a guy can get a promise of $10 trillion of investment in the first 6 months of a 4-year term, what will that end up being over a 4-year term and hopefully later if another Republican gets in? So that could potentially take care of the difference, the 2.5 trillion with a $10 trillion investment. Now, remember, that's just in 6 months. So right there you have maybe it's squared away. And that might be how Trump's looking at it. I don't know.
Well, clearly, the trillions of dollars of investment, especially in manufacturing jobs, are going to make a difference. The biggest difference with a manufacturing job, and we've talked about this before as well, if I'm a copier repairman, or I'm selling a car, or I'm in the dry cleaning business, if I take my car in to get it repaired, I'm paying a fee for a service rendered. If I get my dry cleaning done, I'm paying a fee for a service rendered. There's no intrinsic increase in value in that transaction. And the biggest difference with a manufacturing job is that you take X amount of cost in labor, X amount of cost in raw materials, and you put that labor and raw material together, and you get from that combination, you get a product that is exponentially more value in its exchange price. So if it cost you, $40 worth of labor and materials to make something that you're able to charge a $230 retail price for, you see that what you've done is you've exponentially increased the value in your economy through the appropriate use of the manufacturing, taking raw materials and making them more valuable. So there's that piece of it that'll increase tax revenue to the government. But I don't want you to, I don't want to let your 10% tariff statement go by without a further explanation. It's one thing to just talk about the tariffs, but the bigger aspect of this, in my mind, is we're going to charge higher amounts of tariffs for certain products and services because we'll make those products and services here, and those products that are made here will be sold more quickly and more rampantly than these imports. But in addition to that, by charging fair tariffs, we'll be able to use our manufacturing to export more product to other countries, which will benefit us again in that aspect because the tariffs won't be so onerous that our products built here will be competitive in those foreign nations when they go. So there's multiple pieces of this supply chain that benefit the United States when we're looking at it from the tariff perspective.
Yeah, and that's why I caveated what I said with as it currently stands, because the hope is in the near future that $1 trillion a year deficit will start to flip maybe completely the other way. And who can foresee that? We don't know.
But the other piece of it is even with our friends, right? I mean, Canada puts tariffs on our dairy products to protect their dairy farmers in Canada.
Hmm.
So when dairy products come to the United States, they're more expensive than the dairy products that are made in Canada. Likewise, when they send us lumber, and they've got lots of trees in Canada, when they send us lumber, we put a tariff on it, then it costs us more to build houses, right? So if we could get to the point where with our closest neighbors and closest friends, we're not doing those tariffs. Imagine what could happen to the industries of both countries. Each could see a tremendous amount of growth and also benefit consumers in many different ways. But let's just for a moment go back and talk about what happens with our tremendous amount of debt. When we have debt, and right now, as Elon Musk says, I trust his numbers. I don't know if they're accurate, but I accept it on face value that 25% of our revenue is going not to pay for various parts of government, but in fact, just pay the
Service
debt
the debt.
service.
Yeah.
Um, that leaves us with a tremendous hole in our budget, but it also means that certain necessary services, whether you want to talk about Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, military retirement pay, whether you want to talk about defense budgets, if you want to talk about how we take care of people in the healthcare arena, with things like Obamacare and all those other things, we don't have money to put towards those very good and very needed parts of our economy. So there's a double-edged sword with that debt service taking so much money of our revenue. And if we can somehow figure out how to recapture that and to lower our debt and not have 25% of our revenue going to it. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do it. And as we said, Donald Trump's approach to it is that top line effort. We're going to make so many more goods, products, and not only sell them here, but sell them abroad, that the natural taxes we recover from our manufacturing business will help to reduce that deficit, in addition to the tariffs. And of course, that may or may not be true. Elon Musk is looking at it from the perspective of we've got to reduce expenses. And what I believe, Mike, is there's probably a little bit of each in there. This big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump is so married to has a tremendous amount of pork in it, has a tremendous amount of projects that are pet projects that are buying votes to vote yes on this bill that gets passed. Now, one could argue that in politics there's compromises and there's horse trading. Well, I'll put your special bridge project in here, so you get a bridge in your in your district if you vote yes for this bill. Well, that bridge may or may not be necessary, may or may not be needed, but shouldn't we only do projects that are needed? And in order to, if you're buying votes, the big beautiful bill passed the House of Representatives by one vote. Now the Republicans have a small majority in the Senate. We have 53 senators, but at least two senators have already said they're not going to vote for it.
Right.
So that means we have 51 senators that perhaps, maybe, might vote yes for this bill that passed the House. But I talked to my local congressman, and he was honest with me. He said, Alan, look, there's at least 3 or 4 members of the House of Representatives having voted yes for this bill and now understanding what it's going to mean in real terms. They've changed their mind, and if they could go back and do that vote over again, they'd vote no. So I don't know what the risk is. I don't know what the impact is going to be if the Senate doesn't pass this bill. I know, as I've said already, that if we lose the Trump tax cuts from 4 or 6 years ago, that's a 20 or 22% increases in taxes to Americans. Do you know what kind of drag on the economy? I mean, we're already have people that are having difficulty making ends meet. By the way, the other facet of this increased debt, when we have to pay that 25% of our revenue for debt service, you know how we pay it, right?
Well, you either print money or you raise taxes, one
We
of the
print
two.
we print more money. So what happens when we print more money?
Inflation.
the current dollars, the current money that we have is worth less. It's not worthless, it's worth less. We were talking earlier, right? I said that candy bar I used to buy as a kid for a quarter now costs $2.39 in a convenience store. That's a hell of an increase for a candy bar. And, I told you before, I used to get a quarter allowance when I was a kid, and I'd go to the local convenience store. I'd buy a tasty cake pie, and I'd buy a comic book, and the combination of those two products cost me exactly a quarter. So I'd get my quarter, I'd get my allowance on Saturday, I'd go over to the convenience store, I'd blow it in 5 minutes. But I read the comic book and ate the tasty cake pie, and I was happy. But we can't do that anymore. You can't buy anything for a quarter anymore.
Boy,
Nothing.
you are old.
It's funny. Our local township just had an increase in their trash collection, and the increase in the tax collection was 75 cents a quarter. Said another way, it was 25 cents a month. It was a nominal, almost insignificant increase, but people were complaining and said they couldn't afford to pay it. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? So what do we do when all of a sudden these this 25% debt service becomes greater burden on us, and we have to spend more money not on defense or on Medicare or all these other needed programs, but we're just spending it on debt service. What that means is more money printed, and that means higher prices in the store, higher prices in your at the gas pump, higher prices for everyday items that we take for granted. And can America take the double whammy of either losing that tax cut that's about 20 or 22% tax cut or tax increase if we don't keep it, or the increased cost at the supermarket or the department store when when you go buy something. And it wasn't that long ago, Mike, prices that we paid for in the economy were significantly less. Wages were less, but prices were less. I can remember when somebody's making $100,000 a year, that was a lot of money. $100,000 a year in a job is kind of like,
Average.
yeah, it's okay, but not great. And it's not the changes to the job, it's not the changes to the work, it's not the value of the employee. It all has to do with the value of the dollar.
Yeah, I look into that a lot. I was driving back up the Delmarva Peninsula a couple of weeks ago, coming up from Virginia Beach. And here in the middle of nowhere, there's spots in there where there's almost nothing. There's a little convenience store, and with nothing around it for miles. Sign out front, help wanted, starting at $18 an hour. In the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So, it was those kind of days when you go back and you think, wow, it wasn't long ago people were complaining about a $7 and some odd cent minimum wage. And instead of raising the minimum wage, it's like nobody can pay that. They have to pay double that at least to get
or triple.
Triple. Well, California is going to raise theirs, as a side note, to increase till 2028 to be $30 minimum wage per hour, because the Olympics are coming and it's going to drive a lot of businesses, they said, out. So we'll see how bad California does. But yeah, inflation is crazy. And, folks, if you want, go to your phone. Anytime, we're all different ages. I was teasing Mac about being old. Well, we're only 2.5 years apart. And I don't know how old any viewer is, but it's kind of cool. Say you're 40 years old. Go back and look at what the dollar was when you entered the job market. Just ask Google, what was $1 worth, and name the year compared to today, and it'll tell you, and it'll absolutely blow your mind.
Yeah. Again, common everyday occurrences of exchanges in the retail marketplace have gotten so crazy as to almost seem insane. My father said something to me the other day about going to a movie. I said, no, Dad, I don't have time. We can't do it, whatever. And he said, oh, that's fine. It'll save me $5. When was the last time you were able to get into a movie theater for $5? You know what I mean? So, and I told him, I said, Dad, you mean $20? I mean, a ticket to the movie, you can't buy a ticket to the movies for $5.
I haven't gone to the movies in 20 years. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I used to go to the movies much more frequently than I do now. There are occasionally movies that I want to see on the big screen simply because it is a better experience. You can always rent them in the privacy of your living room, right, for a much reduced rate. And of course, everybody in the family can watch it when you rent it at home. But it's not the same experience, especially for some of these fantastic movies with a lot of CGI and a lot of AI kind of stuff. By the way, what do you think AI is going to do to our retail world? You know what I mean?
Well, like we've said this before, my thought is that it's going to be like the Industrial Revolution, but it's going to be different because this is happening at a breakneck speed. The Industrial Revolution took a little while to kick in, so it gave human beings the opportunity to start making adjustments. But there was suffering during that time,
Sure there was.
unemployment.
Yep.
I think it's going to hurt really bad, but it's not going to last very long. I think, and when I say very long, every term is relative. 5, 10 years, we'll be in a lot of serious pain, upheaval. If we're able to survive it, then I think on the other end of it, we'll make the adjustments needed. Human beings are very adaptable. That's one of our strengths. And we will figure out what to do. Like Elon Musk, smart guy, he sees a time when the average Joe, at least in America, it'll start here first, but it'll eventually spread to the rest of the world, in his opinion. You'll be able to have pretty much anything you want without even needing to work because AI and robotics will be doing everything. It'll cut the cost of manufacturing. If something costs $100 to be created by a human, it costs 2 cents to create by AI and robotics. So, that brings the prices of farm goods, food, clothing, cars, furniture, everything
But that's why you
way
hear
down.
people talking about the universal basic income
Yep.
because people may not have jobs,
Right.
but they still may get money.
hmm
Um,
That's how it works in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait right now. You have a
well,
universal basic income.
even
Everything's
even
just
even
fine.
even in Alaska, with the amount of oil they take
Yeah.
out of every permanent resident of Alaska gets money back from the government for the oil that's taken out of the ground. My thing with AI is that we will do things better, faster, smarter, more quickly, and industries that we're not aware of will creep up and rapidly overtake the prime existing legacy businesses. Let me give you an example. I remember when Eastman Kodak developed their film business and their camera business. And there was a time in America where Kodak was, I mean, if you were doing anything with taking pictures, Kodak was involved. They were either making the film or they were making the camera, they were doing the developing or whatever. If it had to do with photographs, Kodak was getting a piece of the action somewhere, whether it was just because they had all the patents on all these different kinds of. But years ago, some of their engineers came to Kodak manufacturing and said, hey, this digital photography stuff, there may be something to this.
hmm
And of course, the people at Kodak, because their whole world was
Film and
cameras
paper.
and
Yep.
film and printing on, Kodak paper and all this kind of stuff, they said, "Oh, that's crazy. Nobody's going to want digital. What? They're going to want to print it and they're going to want to hold it in their hand and look at the picture and the colors." And so they never invested in digital photography. Well, now you look at what is left of Kodak, and they basically don't exist anymore. Many of the patents they have for photography are still in place, but you can't buy Kodak paper anymore. You can't buy Kodak film anymore. Maybe you can. I don't know anybody that uses film anymore, to be honest with
There's
you.
a handful left, not
So,
many.
but the point I'm trying to get to, Mike, is that was a legacy business who could not see the end of their business by new technology. And what AI is going to do, not only like what digital photography did to Kodak, but what AI is going to do in so many different facets of our world. I was watching something, I was looking for something in particular on the internet the other day, and this movie, it was only a 6 or 8 minute clip of a movie. and it was supposedly part of a larger story that had been created by completely by AI, completely by AI. People just put in some statements, some suggestions, some words. This is a story about the military, and these guys are trying to capture terrorists, and they're in this kind of environment, all this stuff. And AI created a movie, and I only saw a few minutes, a 6-minute clip of it. But I'll be honest with you, Mike. I could not
Couldn't
tell you that
couldn't
it was
tell the
not real
difference.
actors.
No.
I could not tell you it was not a film created by Hollywood. Now, I'm sure that somebody with a trained eye could probably see the differences, um, but I couldn't tell the difference. It looked to me like actors that were in military uniform, performing military duties. And what what does AI? Do you know what part of California's revenue? People like to say California's ninth largest economy in the world, right?
Yeah.
What part of that economy is the movie and music business in California?
I don't know. It used to be a lot more because they've moved overseas into Atlanta, Georgia, a lot of it. So what is it?
The point I'm trying to make is that will AI eliminate what I'll call quote Hollywood end quote from the economy of California?
Oh, well, that was what the whole Writers Guild and Actors Strike was about because they said it's just going to take over.
Again, all I'm trying to draw attention to is what is the impact of AI if they eliminate what we think of today as the motion picture business in Hollywood. I mean, I don't want to narrowly define it that way. All of the things, the TV shows that are broadcast, remember when the Johnny Carson show used to originate from Burbank, California?
Hmm.
Well, will they have a Johnny Carson in the future, or will some AI generated character be the new Johnny Carson?
And be interviewing something else that's AI.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's just, and that's just in that piece of the business.
Yeah. Let alone technology is big in California, and
You
that's
know, if
moving out
if
too a
if
little
if
bit.
my son was going to college to be an accountant, you know what I'd tell him?
Don't do it.
Don't be an accountant.
It's going away.
It, and I have told my grandchildren this: go into some sort of business that is human
Oriented, maybe.
human significant. Um,
Car mechanic.
AI can't give you a massage.
Right. Barber,
Okay,
barber can't cut your hair yet.
all of those things.
Yeah.
And my point is that look, an electrician, a plumber, they can't be replaced by AI. Parts of their jobs may be
Parts, yeah.
automated by
Yeah.
AI, but the work of turning the wrenches and putting the new, seal on your wax seal on your toilet, that has to be done by a human being, unless they get to the point where a robot can do it.
Right. For
And
now.
that may
For
not be
now.
too far in the
No.
future. But my point is that at what point in time are humans not going to be part of the equation? And as we're talking about that $2.5 trillion worth of deficit adding to our debt, what are the implications of this AI and robotics on that deficit and debt? Because, I like to think about the debt, the national debt, as being something my children and grandchildren are going to have to pay.
They are.
But,
Somebody has to sooner or later.
we say that so confidently, Mike, like we know that's true. But in the future, if our children and grandchildren don't have jobs, and there's something called the universal basic income, the will there even be a capitalist society? Will we even have a capitalist economic system?
It's hard to say.
Or will it be that there are so many automated pieces of the economy that we're no longer interested? you go back in history, and was it de Tocqueville who wrote the story of America? And he said, you know, it doesn't matter if you're black or white or yellow. The real thing is green,
Yeah.
because the baker who's baking the bread sells the bread to, and the banker gives the money to the baker, and the baker bakes the bread, and the people eat the bread, and they give the money to the baker. And it's so the interest there was not an opposition kind of relationship, but whether a cooperation kind of business, right? The farmer created the grain, which went to the baker, that he turned into bread, and then the individual who's working at the candle making shop, he bought the bread to feed his family. So the economy was were intertwined and interexchanged with one another. When AI is doing all of those kinds of jobs, where does the interaction come from? Is there still a capitalist exchange of money for talent and goods and services? You know, and does that $2.5 trillion deficit go away if we're completely automated? Because I'm not even sure what is included in that $2.5 trillion. We're getting pretty far afield
Yeah.
from the big beautiful bill, and you know, when we're talking about um, the raw amount of money that we're going into debt, that sounds like a terrible thing to me. And maybe it's a terrible thing to me only because I'm worried about my children and grandchildren having to pay it off. But maybe the direction we're going, Mike, eventually those debts just disappear. People don't care about them anymore because we have so much excess from the automation that we have that maybe it's not important anymore. Is that possible?
It's possible, and it's something to ponder.
I
But
guess we'll ponder.
we'll ponder.
Let's ponder for a while. In the meantime, I guess we should say we beat this up enough.
Yeah.
Mac and Mike
Out.
out.